Good morning, everyone. I'm Lorraine Wood. I'm the director of Arena, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today on this beautiful sunny morning to Arena's virtual event, Natasha's Law, Understanding the Implications for Food Service and Hospitality, which is being sponsored by one of our members who joined Arena this year, Nutritics, who is the world's leading food information and labelling software company. I'm sure most of you know Natasha's Law has absolutely huge implications for our industry. And for today's event, we thought we would bring together some leading experts within the supply chain who are responsible for implementing Natasha's Law within their businesses. So before handing over to our panel host, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on each of them. So representing the food manufacturing side, we have Delifrance, who since 1978 has been developing bread, viennoiserie, patisserie and savoury products for food service providers, bakers and retailers worldwide. And we're delighted to have with us today their Group Compliance Director, Richard Vaughan. Richard is a real expert in this field. He's got over 20 years experience within the technical side of food manufacturing, and he joined Delifrance in 2012 and became their Group Compliance Director in 2019. And as part of his role, Richard and his team are responsible for ensuring that their products are compliant to the relevant laws and legislation updates. On the hospitality and leisure side, we have Merlin Entertainments, one of the world's largest attraction operators with familiar venues that many of us have visited, such as Alton Towers, Legoland and Madame Tussauds. Within the UK, Merlin has over 20 different types of food and beverage operations, from seated restaurants to grab-and-go concessions. And today we have with us Anna Watson, their Group Food Safety Manager, who is part of the team supporting the F&B operations globally. Anna has over 30 years experience in this area, and she's also chair of the Merlin Allergen Working Party and member of the UK Hospitality Food Experts Group. Next up, representing contract catering, we have Thomas Franks, who is a privately owned contract caterer with over 150 sites, not only in the UK, but also Malta, Portugal and Ireland. With its bespoke approach within the corporate and independent school sectors, we're delighted to have with us today their nutrition consultant, Julia Hayes, who has worked with them for over 8 years. Julia was responsible for introducing the food information regulations across the business in 2014 and managed the introduction of gluten-free accreditation with Celiac UK, making the business the first contract caterer to hold this award. And last but not least, we have Nutritics, our sponsor. As I mentioned earlier, Nutritics is the world's leading food information and labelling software company. And we're delighted to have with us today their Senior UK Business Development Manager, Claire Stead. Claire has over 10 years experience working across the hospitality, leisure, education and healthcare sectors, demonstrating how technology streamlines business processes, increases profitability and mitigates risk. Claire is currently working with food service operators in helping them to understand the upcoming changes of the UK Food Information Amendment, which is also known as Natasha's Law, and consulting on how to effectively roll out solutions to support the new food labelling legislation. So that was really just to give you a bit of background about who our panellists are. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our host for today. So for 30 years, this person has worked with a number of businesses in both food service and retail. She's won a number of awards and was voted one of the top 150 women in food, drink and hospitality. And at the start of COVID, really helped me launch our series of Ask Arena webinars. So without further ado, can I please welcome the CEO of William Murray PR and Marketing, Anita Murray, to host our discussion. Over to you, Anita.
Hi there, everyone. Lovely to see so many of you joining us on this Thursday morning. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction to Natasha's Law. So in the UK, we've got 2 million people who have been diagnosed with an allergy to food, and that figure is growing. Natasha's Law will come into effect from the 1st of October this year and will require food businesses to provide full ingredient lists and allergen labelling on all foods pre-packaged for direct sale on premises. And as many of us know, this is largely the result of a campaign by the parents of Natasha, Edna and Laperouse, who tragically died from an anaphylactic reaction after eating a baguette containing sesame seeds. And there was no indication that the product contained allergens. So from this October, all pre-packed foods for direct sale will have to display a standardized label with full product name, full ingredients, including the 14 allergens highlighted. And at the moment, suppliers of raw ingredients and, for example, pre-made sauces have to, by law, provide a list of all ingredients to a food operator. And this information now needs to be integrated and maintained within the food chain so that it can be conveyed to the end consumer on a label. The legislation, of course, is being introduced to ensure that consumers, and in particular those with allergies, can clearly see what is in the food. But there are a host of complex implications for the food industry to consider. Our expert panel that Lorraine has just introduced will share their knowledge, experience and advice over the course of the next hour. And hopefully that will make it easier for you to ensure compliance in your businesses. So I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First of all, welcome to Claire Stead from Nutritics.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Secondly, welcome to Anna Watson from Merlin Entertainments.
Hi, good to be here, thank you.
And welcome to the only male on our panelist this morning, which is quite unusual. So hello to Richard Vaughan from Delhi, France.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here.
And finally, welcome to Julia Hayes from Thomas Franks.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here.
Brilliant. So without further ado, we'll crack on with the questions. So allergen management is, as we've heard in those introductions, relevant to all stages of food production, from raw ingredients through to the sale to a consumer. So first, we're going to take a look at how this is affecting all of your businesses. And Richard, part of your role is to ensure that bakery products are compliant with the relevant laws and that you are aware of all of the potential changes coming down the line. As a major food manufacturer supplying into food service and hospitality, how is Natasha's law affecting Delhi, France, and what are the main challenges as you see them?
Well, our main internal challenge is to make sure that the product specifications, product labels on our products are correct and up to date. So we've been working with to ensure that all of our information is accurate and available to our customers. The external challenge particularly has just been to educate and assist our customers on the understandings of what Natasha's law is. So what is or isn't a product for pre-pack for direct sale.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. And Anna, you're part of the health, safety and security team supporting the F&B operations globally in, I think it's about 80 Merlin attractions. So with so many different types of food operations, what are the challenges facing Merlin regarding Natasha's law?
So it is quite a challenge to us, obviously, as being a large caterer with all these different types of food outlets. Since 2014, we've actually been able to apply the principles of the Food Information for Consumers regulations globally. So the principles are easy to apply, even though there's different allergens and different allergens and numbers of allergens that we need to declare across the world. The principles of signposting, saying please ask the customers, having an allergen matrix with all the information detailed, and allergen management procedures and training underpinning that has worked for us. And in particular, it allows that dialogue between the guest and the customer. So they can ask for information and we're able to have that dialogue and discuss their needs. With Natasha's law, obviously we're now needing to label certain types of products. And the greatest challenge has probably been the fact that we now need to provide a full list of ingredients on these products. It's not just giving the information about the allergens, but the label has to contain all the ingredients. So for a cheese and ham sandwich, it's not just a case of bread, cheese, ham. it's all the ingredients that go into that bread and the cheese and the ham. So I don't think that everybody fully appreciates how complex that is, and how we have to rely on our suppliers to give us the information of those ingredients that then go on the label. There's then the challenge of the format of the label, so descending order of weight, the correct font size, the highlighted allergens. So it's not just a case of handwriting the label, it's a lot more complicated than that. And then the technical guidance has thrown up additional challenges. For example, it states that pre-packed for direct sale food includes food packed on the premises in anticipation of an order before being offered for sale. And the example that they've used in the technical guidance includes fast food, such as the wrapped burger or boxed chicken placed under the hot lamp. So now all these burgers and the chicken and the other things that we do in our fast food outlets, that on a busy time we're pre-packing before the customer's actually ordered, now fall within this pre-pack for direct sale. And it also includes food that the customer might select from a chiller cabinet or select from themselves, but also includes food that has to be obtained from a member of staff. So even if that hot shoot is behind the server and the customer doesn't have sight of it before they ask for it, now we have to provide a label. So a big challenge to us, particularly in those fast food type outlets.
Thanks, Anna. That certainly is, yeah, excuse the pun, food for thought in terms of the complexity. So thank you. And Julia, as a registered nutritionist, you've worked with Thomas Franks for over 8 years within education and corporate sectors. So what are the challenges that you're facing in planning for Natasha's Law?
Well, I would say probably many of the same challenges that Anna has described, really, but the difference for us is that we're a much smaller family-owned contract catering business working in schools primarily, with some corporate head office locations, and we're across the country as well. We aim to use fresh ingredients as much as possible, and only buy in a small amount of prepared and processed foods. So our kind of key USP, if you like, is to use local suppliers. And so we have a huge number of small producers and food businesses that tend to deliver directly to our clients. And although that's a fantastic selling point, it's brought a lot of challenges when we come to consider Natasha's Law. For example, we don't have a database of all our ingredients that we use across the business. So that's the first major challenge, really. At the moment, allergens are managed using the matrix that Anna mentioned, and that's completed by the chef on site. And they are responsible for just checking the ingredient list on the packaging to produce that matrix and pass that information on to the customer. And that's obviously open to a lot of human error. So it's fantastic that we've got Natasha's Law coming into place, but the challenges to prepare for it are quite substantial. So the first step was for us to present a business case to the management team and demonstrate that quite a large investment was going to be needed into a software system that would help us be compliant with Natasha's Law. And that we were going to have to look at some major shifts in how we operate. So we started off having conversations with various different providers of software. I've been working with Nutritics for a number of years independently. And so I had a discussion with Stephen Nolan, the CEO of Nutritics, and he came along to our supplier day and talked about what they could offer. And it was clear at the start that they were way ahead of their competitors in terms of being ready for Natasha's Law. And so Nutritics was clearly the sort of front runner from the outset. But coming back to challenges, really the second challenge was around our suppliers. As I've said, that many of them are very small, and the way they work is that they tend to not have software systems either. We have lots of kind of family-owned butchers that send their invoices in handwritten, for example, so that's quite a difference in terms of bringing them on board with us and coming on this journey to introduce the sort of type of information that we need from them. And so we recognised it was going to take a long time. So we started having our conversations with Nutritics back in the end of 2020. Our chefs as well are not used to working to set recipes. The ethos of Thomas Franks is about giving chefs the freedom to create their own dishes, and so they haven't been used to working with centralized recipes. And although we're only talking about PPDS foods, there's a lot of resistance, or we're anticipating quite a bit of resistance from our chef teams about having to comply with these centralized recipes. And we've got over 5,000 product lines. So we realised we were going to have to reduce the number of those for uploading. That was quite an onerous task, and so we've gone through an exercise of streamlining our ingredients so that we can manage the number of product lines. There's practical challenges as well, things like the school holidays and the training needs. So we know that our schools will be breaking up shortly. So we've got a whole period of time over the summer holidays where it's going to actually be quite challenging to get our teams in to train them on these systems. We've got the restrictions of COVID as well that have impacted us. We've got lots of boxed meals being prepared in schools rather than having lunch served across the servery. We're preparing boxed meals which will then need to be labelled. So those are the kind of challenges that we're dealing with.
So that's a long list of challenges.
Sorry, yes.
I think, but an important list, and I think you're going to have a very busy summer by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
So Claire, you got a glowing reference there from Julia. So you know, Nutritics, your firm works with companies to support them in collating and communicating food information, ingredients, allergens, and nutritional values. And as we heard, you know, from Julia, the software is important. It allows for stock management, identification of efficiencies, and areas of cost saving, which are important to any business. So how does Natasha's law fit in with this and what you offer?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Anita. And Nutritics realised many years ago, actually, that demand for transparency around ingredients would grow. And we anticipated that standardisation across the industry would come into play at some point. So we've always been working on designing a software that would meet that forecasted trend. And the sad reality is, as you've been saying, is that food allergies can be fatal. And it's for this tragic reason that Natasha's law is being rolled out from the 1st of October. We've been hearing from the other panellists that access to ingredients and nutrition information is a necessary measure to help individuals manage any risk of consuming allergens. It is now too risky to not know exactly what is in the food that a consumer is having at that moment in time. You know, there are still today an estimated 10 deaths a year in the UK caused by the consumer not knowing exactly what is in the food that they're eating. So that is why the move to the full ingredient listing is taking place alongside that emphasis on the 14 EU allergens. So just to say, the purpose of Natasha's law is to make sure that consumers know exactly what is in the food that they're eating. And that fits with Nutritics and our vision, because we've held a long-term belief that powerful information of this type should be easily accessible by anyone. And that the supply chain can support the demand and the transparency required. So we heard from Julia a moment ago, you know, we're not just talking about the big national wholesalers here, you know, the small local suppliers who are affected by this change as well. So it's really important that the software, Nutritics or otherwise, is out there to support all of those differing needs. And we know that the work we've done in the years leading up to now means that accuracy and reliability are a given. And there's no need to compromise between the user-friendly interfaces, yet still benefit and operate from that in-depth functionality.
Brilliant, thanks a lot, Claire. And that kind of neatly brings us to the next question. You know, everybody is talked about the plethora of processes that each company has to go through within every part of the food chain, and that some are going to be more complex than others. So I'd like to start with you, Anna, and ask you the next question. I mean, we've heard that Merlin has a range of food operations, from, you know, your seated restaurants to grab and go, and obviously within each there's different food offerings. So this is a two-part question, but I'll remind you of the second part in a minute. So can you describe the processes you're going through for each of your food operations? And if a recipe changes, how do you manage the ingredients in order to ensure compliance?
Okay, so I'd just like to say that some of our challenges that Julia mentioned, we share some of those challenges along the lines of the fact that we haven't got centralised databases, and the attractions all work very much as their own businesses. So just to give you that picture, first of all, we haven't started using Nutritics yet. It's the company that we've selected going forward, but it's actually taken us 5 months to get there. So I can't talk about how we're going to, what we've done to implement the process, but I can certainly talk about the process that we followed to get where we are today. We didn't, obviously last year was basically written off, and we weren't able to start this process. So come January, we were very keen to get going to make sure that we met the October the 1st deadline. And the first thing we did was to form a working party within Merlin, and invited stakeholders from all the UK attractions to sit within the working party and discuss obviously how we're going to take this project forward. I'm chairing the party. We meet now on a monthly basis, and it's been very successful getting us to where we are at the moment. And I think the most important thing that I can share from that is the importance of involving all stakeholders in the business at this stage. So as well as the heads of F&B and the people from the operations teams who are actually going to stick that label on the box, we had commercial directors from the attractions, we had members from group procurement, because obviously we're going to be dealing with the suppliers and we need their engagement, retail buying, because we've got popcorn and pick and mix and all those sorts of things that might be impacted as well. And probably the most important people sitting on the working party are IT. So obviously we knew that we would need some software somewhere along the line. So getting IT involved right from the beginning was really important. So all the different operating groups that within the company, the resort theme parks, the Legoland theme parks, and midways. So the midways are the Madame Tussauds and the London Eye and the Lego Discovery Centres that we have, sat within that working party. To start with, I introduced to them what PPDS foods were, Natasha's law, what it's about, where it's come from, why we need to do what we need to do. And then I asked all the attractions to go away and think about which products would fall within that scope of pre-packed for direct sale food and which outlets they were being sold from. I also asked them to consider whether there's any changes in the operation, which would mean that we could actually take the products out of scope. So if we can buy in sandwiches, as a lot of our cafes do in Midways, for instance, which are fully labelled from a supplier, we don't need to label them ourselves. So that takes away that responsibility from us. Or just making foods to order or packing them to order. So if somebody orders a panini and we don't put it in the pack until we serve it to the customer, that would take it out of scope, or indeed the type of packaging that we serve it in. So if the packaging is open and not enclosed, that would be out of scope. So between the first and second meetings, I think I asked the F&B teams to go away and consider what would be pre-packed for direct sale, and how we could change the operation. This meant actually that we took all our midway attractions out of scope. They are able to buy either fully labelled products or packed to order. So we've actually taken them to a separate working party where we're going to look at how we're going to make sure that happens. And that left us with the 4 main large theme parks within the UK, who then had to consider the products, the ingredients that went into them, and the suppliers that supplied those products, and how we're going to make sure that the right information gets on the right box, on the right label. The next part of the exercise was an IT scoping exercise, where they looked at the existing software systems within our attractions. As I say, they all work differently. They all have different recipe, stock management systems. So IT had a big job on their hands, just looking at what we've got currently and what we needed to do to make sure that we had that facility to be able to take the ingredients information from the supplier and make sure it gets on the right label in the right way. And basically, this is where we got to get Nutritics. So they looked at the existing systems, as I say. They assessed some software suppliers, and Nutritics came out on top. So I think mainly due to the simplicity of the process, but obviously they understood very much about what we required and how it needs to work. And I'm looking forward to working with them going forward to make sure the right label gets on the right box.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. That last statement yeah, sums it up, doesn't it, really? And Claire, I obviously, you know, Merlin's one of your newest customers. So, you know, how are you helping them implement the processes? What kind of guides, expert knowledge will you be offering them to kind of make this a smooth transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're delighted to be supporting Merlin, Thomas Franks, and a range of other businesses in the UK, and getting them ready for Natasha's Law and beyond there as well. Generally, we are finding, similar to when we've spoken to Merlin and Thomas Franks, but we are finding that businesses are at different stages of being ready. It's been such a crazy last year with the pandemic, and unsurprisingly, that means for many in hospitality particularly, that they just haven't had the staff or the resources to prepare for Natasha's Law. Anna said a few moments ago that last year was a write-off, and it absolutely, you know, does feel that way, that's replicated across the industry. But none of this means that they can't be ready for the 1st of October. So that's the good news. What I'm hearing personally from speaking to businesses is that implementing a change like Natasha's Law seems quite daunting and complicated. And that's why it's important to work with a partner who not only can provide you with the software and the hardware solutions, but also the expertise to get you set up with a system and then maintain it with you beyond the implementation date of Natasha's Law as well. So our focus at Nutritics is building a relationship with our customers, where we really consult and understand their needs, because even though Natasha's Law is a legislation for all, every business operates slightly differently and has different challenges, bigger and smaller, to face into. So it's really important that we can understand those individual needs. But we know as well, especially in more recent times, that we have to prove ourselves to be reliable and trustworthy, plus deliver easy to use solutions that can be quickly introduced to a food business. And not only that, it has to be easily adopted by the operators who work within them day to day. So, for example, we don't just drop the software that will provide a solution for now. We really work, as I said, with our customers to identify and engage their suppliers on their behalf. We train the operators on how to create recipes, which means that they can automatically see the ingredients and the allergens contained within them. and we work with them really closely to identify what they need in terms of labelling solutions to ensure that each PPDS product being sold has, and Anna said, the right label on it at the right time in the right location. And I know some of the questions coming through at the moment are talking a little bit about PPDS, so we'll go into that a little bit later on as well as to what that means. But ultimately, our customers benefit from the expertise that we have. And certainly I'm finding, I mentioned a moment ago that it can seem daunting and complicated, but actually once we've had that initial engagement and scope session with them, where I play a little bit of a detective really on what their needs are, I find that they're very quickly reassured that we've done some of the hard work for them, which allows them to quickly build accurate databases on ingredients. So our insights help them to learn how to use the software so that it complements their overall food management process, and therefore the food legislation and the technology is no longer seen as that complicated hindrance.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. So basically it's about demystifying the tech
Exactly
and
that.
practical application.
Yeah.
Richard, if I can ask you, what processes are you and other manufacturers going to implement, as part of comply with Natasha's law? And I think the second part of the question is also really important, which is what information are you providing to your wholesalers to also facilitate their the approach to the change?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a food manufacturer, we're constantly reviewing our products and externally sourced items, as well as raw materials, to make sure that they're up to date, accurate. We do this through various means. If there are changes, it's communicating that timeously through to the customer to make sure that they get the most accurate information, and if that has any impact on how they use the end product or our product in the end product. Generally, we supply documentation, product specifications, information, product information sheets, but we also have, because particularly with wholesalers, we don't necessarily know who's going to receive the item. We also have a lot of information on our labels. So it's making sure that the product spec ties in with the product label. So as it's a fully enclosed product, we have to label the ingredients fully, indicate the allergens in bold, and we also add in the may contain statements where it's appropriate. So yeah, it's slightly easier on our side compared to those who are actually kind of feeding the product to the end consumer.
Thanks, Richard. That's really interesting. And Julia, from Thomas Frank's perspective, how many sites do you have that are affected by Natasha's law? And again, a similar vein, what processes are you currently going through?
We have all 150 sites that are affected by Natasha's law, but in varying amounts. So some are more affected than others. So we started the process with talking to our operations team, really similarly to how Anna was describing, surveying them about the level of labelling that was required and the costs involved as well. So we found that, you know, in our smaller nurseries and the small kind of prep schools where lunch is cooked fresh and it's served from a servery, then the only items that are really affected by Natasha's law are things like packed lunches and matched teas and any hospitality that they might be providing. In some of our secondary schools, they might have a small selection of grab and go items in a chiller cabinet, so that would be part of the Natasha's law requirements. But in our business locations, this is our biggest area really, where we've got the most amount of pre-packed food, so wide range of different items provided there, and every location is individual. So even some locations are doing prepared meals that customers take home to cook themselves. So we'll prepare the sort of raw ingredients, a kind of Hello Fresh kind of idea, really. So that's a much bigger challenge for those sites, and creating the recipes and specifications to go with those foods is a huge task because we're starting from scratch. But I'd agree with what Claire was saying in that it did seem really daunting to begin with, the whole task, particularly as we're very different to a lot of caterers. But we've taken quite a systematic approach, and we've had Nutritics to hold our hand across the experience as well. And that's been invaluable. So I would say the reality so far has been much easier than we anticipated initially. So we set up a working party, again, similar to what Anna was saying. So key people involved in that, the procurement team, operations, the chefs, obviously. And the information that we got back from that working party was clearly that there was a lot of duplication. So, for example, we found that we had 30 different types of baguettes used across the business. So clearly we needed to do some minimization of the number of products that were available. So we set about doing that. And we also reduced the number of suppliers that we were going to use for the initial rollout as well. As I said, you know, we've got a vast number of small suppliers, but we chose to work with just 3. So our main dry goods supplier, as well as a couple of others that could give us the sort of ingredients we needed to fulfill the PPDS requirements, as well as a few bespoke suppliers that we needed for our corporate clients. So we've minimised ingredients, we've minimised suppliers, and we're going through the motions at the moment of uploading all of those ingredients into the Nutritics software, and developing our recipes to go alongside those. So we've got a small group of chefs that are writing the recipes. We've tried to minimise everything as much as possible to control the risk of errors and the expertise, really. And we have a trial starting in a couple of weeks of the whole system. So it's sort of fingers crossed that it all goes well.
Exciting. That's again, looking now at I guess what everyone's talked about, how Natasha's law affects all aspects of the supply chain, and the complexities that are involved and the changes, you know, when you change your ingredients, your recipes, etc. I know, Julia, you've talked a lot about streamlining being very important. But I imagine with all of this, there has to be a huge support from the business and a huge level of investment. So Richard, can I ask you, what type of investment has Delifrance made to ensure that you're ready? For example, have you had to invest in new tech, bring on specialist teams? And again, what happens if the ingredients changes?
Well, I'm quite fortunate in that Delifrance invested in a product lifecycle management system several years ago. So the beauty of that is if there are any changes to raw materials, those cascade automatically through to the finished product recipes. And then from that, we can generate the labels that go onto our products for sale onto our customers. So we haven't directly invested because of Natasha's law. But what I certainly have had to do is we've obviously had to put time into the team's diary to enable them to review specifications and ensure that the labels are correct, so that everyone has got the relevant information at the relevant stages. If ingredients do change or products do change, recipes change, etc., we try and do that with a minimal impact on the label. So we certainly would be trying not to add allergens. I mean, as a conscientious supplier, we're always challenging our suppliers to remove allergens where possible. And we've challenged ourselves to remove allergens from our factories. So really, it's as soon as a significant change is highlighted, we would make sure that that's cascaded down through our supply chain, so that the information, then if it was significant, we would be highlighting that to the relevant customer, who hopefully would then cascade that further down the chain.
Thanks, Richard. So from your perspective, it's very much an investment in more time and resource, because you've already got a platform in place that you're utilising. And Julia, I know that you're currently working with Nutritics, as you've said. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're using the system?
Yeah, sure. So at the start of the process, we were given an implementation plan by Nutritics, and we worked really closely with our key account manager, a guy called George McLeod, who I think is part of this call today as well. So hello, George. He's been great in introducing the system and as I said, kind of holding our hand along the process, really. So it has been a lot less painful than we first thought. We've been having weekly meetings with George and some of the key people within Nutritics, as well as our working party, and they've been really valuable at keeping the project focused and on track. So initially getting those suppliers to start working with Nutritics and getting them understanding that, you know, time was important, that this whole project is takes months. So we needed to get those suppliers to work with Nutritics straight away and get them talking about the ingredients and uploading those ingredients. So as I've said, you know, we've limited our suppliers, we've limited the number of ingredients that we're using initially, and we've reviewed those ingredients as well. So, you know, for example, we were buying in some prepped vegetables which contain sulfites. So we've taken those out in favour of using fresh ingredients. We've had to look at where we get things like sliced meats from. So part of the survey that I was talking about identified that we were getting sliced meats from a huge number of different butchers all over the country. So now our dry goods supplier, which is one of the 3 suppliers that we're using for the initial rollout, is going to be supplying those processed meat products so that we can produce our ham and cheese sandwich or whatever for the Natasha's Law requirements, and it just helps to kind of contain everything. So we've learned to sort of that time is really important. So it's about communication and everybody kind of keeping focused and on board with it to keep the project moving as we go through.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Julia. And Anna, you've clearly got a lot of staff there with your 80 sites, and what training have you implemented with your teams on site? And I imagine it's been quite complex to do so. So could you tell us a little bit more about your training?
Well, currently, because we're not rolling out the Natasha's Law requirements yet, we've still got the training requirements that we had previously. So we have an Allergen Awareness course, which is an online course that we've developed internally, a manager's allergen course, which talks more about how to actually develop an allergen matrix and the more management procedures they need to put in place. And also, as I say, each attraction works slightly differently. So they all have their own allergen management procedures, and they all have to train them to not just the F&B team members, but there might be a specific requirements for an outlet. So each attraction will have its own training, and each outlet will need its own specific allergen management procedures trained in. So going forward, Nutritics will help us with training in how to use the software and inputting recipes and how to print labels. But obviously we're going to have to review our allergen management procedures to take that into account, again, the right label on the right box, but also to consider what happens if a printer breaks down, what are our emergency procedures going to be if we just can't get that label printed or where we want it to be. So we are going to have to review our training, but first we have to review our allergen management procedures, and each outlet and attraction will need to do that to incorporate the new requirements and the labelling requirements as part of that, and the use of Nutritics as well.
Brilliant, thanks Anna, thank you. And Claire, clearly Nutritics provides a single solution for companies to help ease and facilitate the the compliance with Natasha's Law. But how does your system work for manufacturers, wholesalers and operators?
Yeah, it really does. The key is that Nutritics is that one-stop shop for food businesses, whether it is an operator, a wholesaler, a supplier, etc. We started with the ingredients, and we have built up a robust database with over 1 million products, working closely with manufacturers and wholesalers. So we're the first system software worldwide to be accredited with a gold standard for recipe calculation methods. That was awarded by the European Food Information Resource, which basically means that businesses, whether manufacturer or wholesaler, can trust that we apply the highest of standards when we utilise their food composition data. And that ultimately gives peace of mind to all, including the end operator. So the guys who work at Thomas Frank's and Merlin can know that there's that high standard in place with the ingredient data. Operators can access that database, so from wholesalers, manufacturers, etc. Or we onboard, as we've been hearing with Julia, we onboard their own supplier data as well. And it's all about enabling the capture of the right ingredients for the recipe, and then ensuring that that information is carried through seamlessly to appear on labels, so it's not doing things in different databases, because that's where risk can be introduced. Importantly, our software aims to simplify rather than complicate the process of recording ingredient and allergen information. We support companies in capturing all of that information on ingredients and allergens in one place, as I've said already, so it's all housed under one roof. There can only be then one version of the truth, and that therefore reduces the likelihood of inaccuracy, and it helps to streamline that food management process too. So as I explained earlier, we're on hand to provide that training and that webinar support, and we work in partnership, as Julia has been saying, with our key account management team, George and the team there, really during the setup and on an ongoing basis with our customers. So there is investment for definite, but the investment in Nutritics will enable quick and easy compliance with Natasha's law by supporting the process from stock to shelf. Importantly, for companies who are looking at the bottom line and wondering about the cost that's going to be involved, our software does more. So it's not just a quick fix for Natasha's law. It immediately delivers returns on areas such as identifying potential for savings. So Julia touched on it earlier about streamlining purchasing behaviours. Instead of buying 37 different baguettes, can we consolidate and make savings there straight away? And it also helps to control waste and empowers more efficient stock management. So there is an immediate return on investment on the software. But it is future-proofed also from the years of hard work that we've been putting into it. So when we start to see proposals around calorie labelling, allergen information needing to be displayed on menus next year, all of that functionality is already available through Nutritics. So the investment needed now isn't just to get a business safeguarded for Natasha's law and then it ends. It goes far beyond that. And certainly, again, from the businesses that I'm speaking to, they are comforted to know that they do have a long-term business solution that's going to take them past the 1st of October. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. And really, a really good point there about future-proofing as well, because there's things that the industry knows about that's coming down the track, but then there will be other things that, you know, in a couple of years will emerge that, you know, businesses need to be ready for. So thank you. And that brings us into kind of talking really about working together. And I think everyone on the panel at some stages mentioned the need to work with wholesale partners, with suppliers, with teams, for example. So essentially, how do you think the industry can work together to ensure the implementation of Natasha's law? And Julia, I'd like to ask you the question first, please.
Well, I think there have to be verification checks at all stages of the process. It's kind of what Claire was just saying about having one version of the truth, and the experience that we've had. You know, the whole point of Natasha's law is about providing accurate information to the consumer. And so caterers and retailers as the end point need to be able to trust the information that they're getting from the manufacturers and the wholesalers. So something that's been highlighted whilst we've been working on this project is that we've had errors with the combined nutrition information being more than 100 grams. And that was flagged up when we entered a recipe into Nutritics. And we raised it as a query with the wholesaler and the software company that they were using, and they refused to accept the error. So we had this kind of, stalemate really. And so it's that consistency in the level of detail, you know, and that's what Nutritics is bringing, that one version of the truth really. And we resolved it by introducing Nutritics to our dry goods supplier, who were really impressed with Nutritics, I have to say, and they are now working directly with Nutritics. So, you know, it's the whole industry understanding the level of accuracy and detail that's required really, and everybody embracing that and raising their game to achieve that. I think that secondly, that the may contain statement is an issue for us, and I know it's not part of Natasha's law, but I'm hoping that, you know, as time goes on, that might be something that we can work together as an industry more on, because it creates huge problems at our end. In schools, for example, we have no nuts in schools, and yet the may contain nuts statement is used on so many products that it limits what we can buy. So I think that would be something that I'd like to see, with the highlight on allergens and on labelling, that comes to the fore, and we resolve that issue.
That's great, Julia. So potentially Natasha's law can lead on to, as you said, bigger and better things in terms of the industry stepping up to again simplify processes, etc. So thank you for that. And Richard, what's your view on this? How are you in particular working with wholesalers?
Well, I think that there's the whole supply chain, from raw materials through manufacturers like ourselves, through wholesalers and into end consumers, is working on this and other topics. So, you know, from our point of view, from Deli Francis' point of view, we have the responsibility to provide the information to our customer, and we ask our raw material suppliers to provide the relevant information to us. So it's a baton passed down the chain is the best way of describing it. I mean, ultimately the aim for all of us is to ensure that the products are safe to eat and enjoyed wherever they may be eaten. So it's a case of, you know, that's I assume that's the purpose. And then our relationship with our wholesaler and our customers is kind of aligned with our corporate values, business behaviours, however you want to phrase it. But, you know, we cooperate, take responsibility, and be true.
Brilliant, thank you, Richard. And I love the analogy of the baton. That's a great analogy. Thank you for that. And Anna, if I can ask the same question to you, please.
So as Richard said, it's the responsibility of everybody within that food chain to make sure that they're providing accurate information. As a caterer, what goes on the label is only as good as what goes in, and the information. We have to work closely with the suppliers. Some of our suppliers with manufacturers, but we have got a large wholesaler that we work with as well. So we're going to work very closely with them, and really pleased with what Nutritics can do for us as far as onboarding suppliers goes and getting that information into the system. And then once we've developed the recipes in the system, it'll draw all that information in and make sure that the right information goes on the label. But as Julia said, we will have to, within our allergen management systems, have the cross-checking and verification. We can't just assume that everything is going to be correct all the way through. So there is going to be some additional resourcing and additional procedures that we need to put in there. And I think the biggest challenge is around when suppliers change formulation and ingredients of products, and also substitutions. So we have noticed that, particularly with the challenges over the last year, we have got more substitutions now. So the supplier might not be able to get a certain ingredient or a certain product, so we'll get something different. It's even worse outside the UK, but we don't need to deal with that with Natasha's law. But so communication from the suppliers of changes, substitutions, it's essential that those processes are in there. And I know, again, Nutritics can help us with that, because as ingredients and formulations change, that can automatically input into the system and into our recipes to make sure that our labels change at the same time. At the moment, that's a really manual process. So we have to actually recognise something that comes in that's been substituted and update all our information manually. But a benefit of having Nutritics in place is that that's going to be streamlined, but that is a particular challenge, and it's so important that communication is there with our suppliers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. I'm glad you mentioned the communication word, because it is very important, isn't it? To keep your partners up to date, especially within the context of this. And Claire, from your perspective as a systems provider, and obviously you're having lots of conversations every day, I imagine, what advice would you offer?
Well, with 4 months to go, our advice is that businesses need to be acting on this now. So our website published a handy 6 months to go timeline. So ideally now at this stage, with 4 months to go, we would be expecting operators to be finalising their database of ingredients and moving on to review and confirm all of their recipes. However, we do recognise that just hasn't been possible for everyone with the pressures of the past year with the pandemic. So if you're feeling worried, if you sat here now feeling really concerned with only 4 months to go, then don't be worried, because we have got you. My advice would be to get going now by identifying what you have in place and where any potential gaps may be. So, for example, do you have all of your suppliers and ingredients recorded? Do you have printers in all of the locations where you will need them, or do you need to purchase any? Come and talk to us if you're not sure if your current processes, your infrastructure or your hardware is suitable. We can provide full guidance. And we've heard heavily from Julia and Anna, particularly about training, staff training. It's not too early now to be embarking on training your staff on Natasha's law, both on why it's needed and the importance of understanding the implications of Natasha's law, but also what it will mean for them day to day when they're actually facing into the challenges that are going to come off the back of it. Anna summarised it perfectly. Like all systems, Nutritics is only as good as the people who are managing it. So we can automate as much as possible, and that will definitely make being compliant with Natasha's law a smoother and more accurate process. But allergen management, as we heard from Julia, also includes cross-contamination. And ensuring that products are in the correct packaging with the correct label. So with Nutritics, we can minimise the risk of human error by automating as much as possible. And it can help with that to say that it means that no last minute changes come into the ingredients, no quick substitutions of a dressing or a sauce without a process to follow. and we have the tools there to ensure that the correct label does go on each product, but the staff training is key so that they understand day to day on how to manage all of those real world scenarios that they'll be facing into. But finally, if you're not sure, then get in touch with a specialist consultant, whether that's a training company, whether that's a food safety expert, or with Nutritics for software advice. We are here to answer any general implementation questions you might have. And we posted in the chat earlier a link to our natashaslaw.com site, which is open to all, free for everyone. It's packed full of handy hints and tips. It's got downloadable guides that can support with staff training and what you need to be considering. But then also, if you want to look specifically at software and infrastructure, just email me. It's really simple. It's just claire@nutritics.com, and I'll do everything that I can to help get you ready for the 1st of October.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And we've got one more question before we get on to the questions from the audience, because we've got quite a lot and there's some really, really good questions on here. So the final question is very much, what's the one piece of advice you would give to companies who are planning for Natasha's Law? So if I can ask this to Richard first, please.
Well, the deadline's fast approaching, so it's never too late until after the deadline. So the sooner you start, the sooner you'd finish. As my fellow panelists have already mentioned, there's lots of support, there's lots of help out there. Just ask. We're back to my baton analogy. We're in this together. We're part of a team. We all want to win. So it's a case of if you've got a query, there are people out there who are more than willing to help and guide you. So everyone's here to help.
That's lovely. Thanks very much, Richard. And Anna, what would be your single piece of advice?
Never lose sight of your objective. So the whole aim of this is to get a compliant label at the end of it. You can get very bogged down in all the nitty gritty and all the, what do we need to comply with Natasha's Law? Just remember that whatever system you're looking at, and as I say, Nutritics is going to do this for us, it needs to make sure that right label comes out at the end. So always bear that objective in mind.
Brilliant, thank you. Very pragmatic, I like that. And Julia, what would your one piece of advice be?
I would say communication and training. So I think communication in terms of using the resources that are available to you internally and externally. So working party internally, software partner, whoever that might be, working with them to get this system in place and get that right label on the right product. And also using the experience I think that we've had from the food information regulations that came in 2014. One of the things I think that I learned from that was how important regular training is for your teams who are actually using the system and producing the label at the end of the day and actually physically putting it on the product. You have to keep refreshing that training on and over again, and making that part of your induction training as well. And COVID as well has highlighted that people forget very quickly. You'd be amazed how quickly people, make stupid mistakes when they come back and have had a break. So ongoing training is key.
Brilliant, thanks Julia. And finally, Claire.
Start now. Don't wait until tomorrow. Start looking into this now with 4 months to go. Look at your processes, and if you haven't started yet, don't panic, but don't put it off any longer. Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone. And just before we go to questions, I think there's just some key takeouts that I'd like to share with the panelists, just in summary. I think you all put these brilliantly. First of all, to take a systematic approach, to get a working party together, work kind of from a cross-department perspective. Streamlining came out loud and clear in terms of procedures, ingredients, etc. Work with a technology partner to help you utilize the data and simplify the implementation. Training, as Julia rightfully said just then. Future-proofing came up as well, so that we're not just looking at Natasha's law, we're preparing in advance. And finally, and Richard talked about the baton analogy. It's all about working together as an industry, drawing on the support that's available, and nobody minds answering questions. I think is the main point. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for a really informative discussion. And now I will go through the questions. So if you'd like to volunteer to answer any of these questions, that would be wonderful. An interesting question has come in from Rustin Toms, who said, do you see a time when customers will have to sign a disclaimer before they actually can sit down and eat in a restaurant? So who would like to take that question?
I would say initially that I hope not. I think the whole point of being able to go out socially and eat, and we found it out even more this year with restrictions, is the fact that it should be a relaxed and enjoyable experience. So we don't want to see the hospitality industry having to put in more rules and regulations than is necessary. And actually, if everyone does start to adhere to Natasha's law and any other legislations that may be coming out in the months or the years to come, then actually that probably shouldn't be needed, because information is transparent, it is out there, and it can be used and adopted fairly easily by any hospitality or any business, as long as they've got, hopefully what we've shown in the last hour, the right processes in place. So we would hope that a disclaimer wouldn't be necessary for guests to sign when they come out to eat.
It's certainly something that I wouldn't advocate. We still have legal responsibilities. A disclaimer doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. And I'm celiac myself, and I've been to restaurants that get me to sign a disclaimer, and from a customer service point of view, it's not great. And I know it's meaningless anyway. So I don't think that the industry should go that way at all.
Brilliant. Does anyone? Sorry.
I would say certainly in schools as well, you know, it wouldn't work. You know, we would have to continue with the allergen management procedures that we have anyway in schools. And so we'd need to provide this sort of information for the children we look after.
Well, thinking about it, if you went round to a friend's house, you're going to ask for them to sign a disclaimer before you give them something to eat.
Might make dinner parties slightly more complicated. But, and there's a question here from Greg Fitchett, and he's saying a question for you, Anna, but obviously all of the panelists can answer this. How do you manage customers who are asking for, say, a burger that you have pre-prepared, and they ask you to remove an item that they don't like? Is your label now incorrect?
Yes, so under Natasha's law, we don't have to provide, this is the silly thing really about this legislation and the technical guidance. If we make a product to order, so if we've modified a product and we've taken, say, cheese out for a dairy sufferer, we've packed that product to order, we don't actually have to provide a label on that product. We won't be able to reach behind us and get something out of the chute that's ready-made, because that won't be altered for the food allergy sufferer. So we'll be making to order it, and in fact we won't need to label it. I think we do need to consider being consistent and whether we will be labelling all products across the board. We haven't quite decided that yet, but strictly speaking, under Natasha's law, the ridiculous thing is, if you don't have an allergy and it's in the hot chute, it does need a label. If you have an allergy and you have to having that discussion and it's being labelled, it is going to be packaged for you, it doesn't actually have to have a label on it. So that is a little bit of a, that's what the legislation allows us to do. But from a consistency point of view, I think we will be looking at labelling all products, but how we would then manage that every time we took out something that was an allergen, I think that would be very difficult to do. So it is about, providing the product and packing it as it's ordered.
Anyone else like to comment? Claire?
And I would just add there that it is really important to understand that legislation. So Anna highlighted there that, it is for PPDS foods. So if you are creating something that is not pre-packaged before the consumer asks for it, then it doesn't fall under the Natasha's Law legislation. So if there is any confusion still out there about that, again, I would just encourage people to go to our natashaslaw.com site. There's all of the FAQs up there that will really help to clarify what does constitute as a PPDS product and what doesn't, and therefore what your responsibilities are as a food service operator.
Brilliant, thank you. And Donna's asked a question which is very pertinent to care. And she's saying, will this law apply to cake sales within a care environment? And will it also include staff meals eaten on the premises?
So again, it comes into the Natasha's Law legislation of what is and isn't classed as a PPDS food. So in the scenarios that Donna has outlined there, a cake sale, for example, if you are not pre-packaging that food, it doesn't need a label. However, as a food service operator, it is encouraged and deemed necessary for anyone to be able to ask if any food they are going to consume contains allergens. So there should still be information available for that individual who's purchasing that food, whether packaged or not, to know what it contains in terms of ingredients and allergens. And that is absolutely the same for the staff food served on site. So if it's freshly plated up food, Julia referred to it earlier with schools, this is a big impact for schools at the hot counters, etc. If it's not being pre-packaged to be taken away to be consumed before the consumer purchases it, it doesn't need the label. However, there does still need to be the information available so that anyone who's going to consume that food has the opportunity to ask whether any allergens are contained within it so that they can make a decision. And Julia, I don't know if you've got anything to add there in terms of the school counters. Oh, you're just on mute, sorry. Someone had to do it.
So on the cake sales, what we recommend to schools, because quite often schools will have things like the Macmillan cake sales where parents send in cakes to school for that they're donating. So we recommend to schools that they use the matrix, the allergen matrix, and they send that out in a newsletter to parents, and the parents complete that and send it in with the cake, so that there is that level of information about allergens in any of the products coming in. As far as staff meals are concerned, for us that would be served from a counter, so it wouldn't be affected by Natasha's Law. But we do kind of restrict teachers bringing in foods into school. So if a teacher's bringing in their own sandwiches or salads or whatever for lunch, then we have it's part of the agreement that the teacher makes with the school that they won't bring in nuts to school, for example, and they will have an awareness of allergens that they possibly might be bringing into the school environment that are restricted. So they're kind of, it's separate really to Natasha's Law, but that's the kind of thing that we would recommend.
Brilliant, thank you. And an interesting question that's been asked by Rosie Ward around wholesalers. And she's asking, in your opinion, where does a wholesaler sit within complying with Natasha's Law? Because as a wholesaler, we do not manufacture the product, but are required to support our customer base with this information and for it to be accurate and reliable.
I think I'll probably step in on that one. So, I mean, yes. So, I mean, a wholesaler should be provided with information from the manufacturer, or supplier of the food. So, I would say it's to ensure that that information is up to date and relevant and accurate. So it's and then pass that on through whatever means that may be, whether you're sending out a formal document, paper or electronic version, or you're relying on the external labels, which have got all of the relevant information that the end consumer, your customer, may need. It's probably what I would say that's your kind of stage. I mean, ask your suppliers, are they reviewing their product specifications, their raw material specifications? I think most manufacturers have some kind of certification which would require them to check at least every 3 years. And generally, most of us have got statements with our raw material suppliers asking them to update us as soon as there's any significant changes, as we would down that chain, pass the baton on.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Richard. Would anyone else like to comment on the question? No. I'll move on to the next one, which is, again, and it's an interesting question about is Natasha's law going to be detrimental to local and small suppliers, as you talked about, Julia. And there's been a lot of talk about moving to one supplier, about rationalisation, and going to a wholesaler who can just do everything. So who would like to answer that?
I'll answer that if you like.
Thank you.
So I would say, I hope not. Although we are limiting the number of suppliers that we're using for the initial rollout, the whole philosophy within Thomas Franks is to use that whole wide range of local suppliers. That's not something that's going to change. But what we're trying to do is give those suppliers time to catch up and get prepared to provide that information to us for what we need. And we are only talking about the PPDS foods, which for us is quite a small part of our business. So no, I hope it won't have a detrimental effect, but I think it is important that those suppliers realise that this level of information is needed, and they will need to find a means of providing that for their customers in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Julia. And would anyone else like to comment before I move to the next question? Nope. Okay. This has come up several times in the thread. People are asking, is there a definitive list that shows what requires labelling and what doesn't? And Donna comes back again and says, can pre-packed mean something as simple as wrapped in cling film? So there seems to be lots of requests for, is there a list that people can really rely upon to help them navigate their way through this?
I'm happy to answer that.
Okay.
So I sit I'm a member of the UK Hospitality Food Experts Group, and they've been lobbying the Food Standards Agency to provide additional guidance on what constitutes pre-packed for direct sale, particularly with examples. So the members within UK Hospitality within the group are asking about the sushi type of outlet with a dome over the product with a dome over the top, or a product on a plate with cling film over it. So it is very much left to interpretation at the moment, and UK Hospitality are going to provide some Q&As and some frequently asked questions to try and help people with this. So in short, really, there is no definitive list. It is a case of looking at the technical guidance and seeing what would fit within those definitions. But yes, UK Hospitality are really fighting the fight and trying to get more information together, because there are such a wide range of examples of different products and different packaging, and will it be and won't it be. So it is quite painful from that point of view at the moment, but the technical guidance, you just really need to read from cover to cover and interpret what it says, unfortunately.
Thanks, Anna. Would anyone else like to add to that? No. Right, I'll move on to the next question. So Mia's asked a question on the back of that, saying, if staff meals are pre-packaged but are provided free, does this still need to adhere to Natasha's law labelling requirements?
I'm going to jump in, not really my area of speciality, but I would say yes. Essentially anything pre-prepared in advance needs to be labelled. So if it's a pre-prepared meal, whether it's going to a member of the public or an internal staff canteen, yes, I would say it needs to be labelled with the ingredients and the allergens.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I agree. It would be, for us, it would be things like packed lunches for the children that are prepared in advance and sent out on a trip. They would need to be labelled.
Yeah, don't be put off by the S in PPDS, which is for sale. It's basically any food that is pre-packed for consumption later on. So it doesn't matter if it's then provided for free, it still needs a label on there.
That's brilliant, thank you. And then trying to kind of batch together questions around essentially what can suppliers do to best support operators, and in addition to that, it's how frequently should operators expect suppliers to be updating their food allergen specs, and you know, how reliable will that be? Do they just take their word for it, for example?
Okay, I'll take that one. So I would say most food manufacturers, food suppliers will have some kind of certification of some description, and normally within that there's a requirement for regular review of finished product specifications and also raw materials. Normally the review frequency is set as every 3 years. But certainly what I would say for Deli France is that if we get notification of a change in an ingredient, we would cascade that as quickly as possible. Well, first thing we do is challenge back and say, do we need to make this change? Why are you making this change? And understand that from the supplier before we brought the ingredient in. So there are already systems in place. Unfortunately, there is no other way of your reliance on your supplier. So yes, unfortunately, there is this element of trust, but considering all of the other elements within food products and food safety, aside from Natasha's law, then it's the requirement. I mean, you can obviously, if there was an issue and the information was proved to be false or had not been updated correctly, and there was an incident, which hopefully there isn't, you could then go back to your supplier and say, well, because of the lack of information, we've had this problem, and then take necessary remedial steps. Is probably the best phrase.
Thanks, Richard. Does anyone else want to add to that? And it's all about really what do the suppliers, what do the manufacturers need to do to help to help you get ready for this? How can they help to make lives easier down the supply chain?
It is similar to what Richard has said. The supplier does have a legal obligation to provide the exact ingredient composition of any foods that are bought from them. So it is considered mandatory within the regulation on the provision of food information. So it is really, really vital that the compositional information is made available by the suppliers. And we alluded to it during the panel discussion, and what Richard said is that, it is absolutely vital that we all work together on this, whether you're a food service operator, a manufacturer, wholesaler, supplier, system provider, we need to be working together to ensure that ultimately consumers can understand what ingredients are in the food that they're buying. And it is all the signs are there that Natasha's law is probably just going to be the start of quite a lot of food legislation changes to come in the future. So it is important that we all start to get on board with this now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. And we've had a few questions in on training, asking what sort of training has been given or is being planned to be given to upskill teams, really to give them the confidence that they need, that they're doing things right, that they're complying.
Well, I can say that we've got our head office training today, this afternoon. So our key team of chefs that will be writing up the recipes into Nutritics are going to be trained for 2 hours this afternoon by the Nutritics trainers. And then next week we will be rolling out training to our location managers, to the sites themselves, in terms of how to produce the labels. So we're minimising who is actually creating labels, and those the recipes will be locked, so site managers won't be able to create their own recipes. That's something that our head office team will do. So we've separated it in that way so that we can control accuracy of the labels at the end point. So yeah, so that's what we're doing.
Brilliant, thanks Julie. Would anyone else like to add to that around the topic of training? Claire?
I think it's just really key that you look at the processes that you have in place at the moment and find those gaps, and then it's important to bring the staff in so that they understand at the base level what the legislation is going to change. I do think there is still a lot of confusion out there as to what will be affected from the 1st of October. And what that means day to day, and that is different between every business, whether you're a big contract caterer to an independent restaurant or cafe. So it's hugely important that you have a champion, a stakeholder who's really going to understand what the changes are, that they seek out their understanding, and then that they not only deliver a one-off training session to their staff, but also build it into all the training that happens from there on in. There will always be staff turnover, so you must ensure that you have it involved in your induction plans when a new member of staff joins you. And certainly for us, we would recommend a frequent review with all of your staff so that they fully understand what the UK food law legislation is, so that they feel confident when out on the shop floor, as it is to deal with the queries that will come through.
That's brilliant. That's great, guys. Thank you so much. We've managed to get through a fair amount of questions. I'd just like to say thank you and hand back to Lorraine.
That's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Anita, for expertly chairing that panel discussion. And a huge thank you to Claire, Richard, Julia and Anna for a really, really insightful panel discussion there. And obviously, thank you very much to Nutritics for allowing us to put on this webinar for Natasha's Law. Now, with all arena events, we always ask that we'd really appreciate some feedback from you. So what will happen is when you leave today, a brief survey will actually pop up in your browser. So it will literally take you less than 2 minutes to complete. So we'd really appreciate if you can complete this, just to let us know what you enjoyed and perhaps what you'd like to hear from in the future. For those of you that don't know also, Arena has been hosting these webinars for the past year during COVID, because we unfortunately haven't been able to run any live events. But the good news is, with restrictions lifting, we are planning our first live event, which will be face-to-face, in person, in the sunshine, on Monday the 5th of July. Now, it's going to be announced next week. It's going to be an absolutely amazing venue, so look out for the announcement next week. And we do hope you can join us for that. But all that leaves me to say is thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed it, and go and enjoy the sunshine. So we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.